Hi there. My name is Holly Haynes, and I am a business strategist that helps you build a full-time business on a part-time schedule without depending on the social algorithm. And on today's episode, we're talking all about the power of group programs and masterminds, but specifically what that means for me behind the scenes, lessons that I've learned, and how you can apply that. And to be honest, I almost scrapped this whole thing because sometimes I question whether I share too much behind the scenes, but honestly, it's the behind the scenes stuff that has helped me the most with mentors that I have hired. And so today we are talking about 2 things you must do before joining any program, why checking the vibe is crucial and what it means for you and me, why asking for results and testimonials matter, 3 key takeaways that I've gotten from my mastermind experience, and how embracing the uncomfortable can lead to massive growth. If you are looking to scale your business and build a supportive community, then this episode is for you. And P.S. applications for our mastermind is open. You could just go to hollymariehaynes.com/mastermind to join the next cohort. On this week's Friday Pep Talk, we're digging into behind the scenes, the biggest takeaways that I've had from the networking mastermind that I joined this year, but sharing behind the scenes so I can share what I've learned and how you can apply it to what you're doing in your business. And so if I'm being honest, I almost deleted this podcast, or at least this topic, because sometimes I question whether I share too much behind the scenes. So apparently it's the time of month where I'm questioning what I'm talking about, but I feel like that's normal. I share it in our mastermind all the time that at least once a month you question your business model and you're like, am I doing the right thing? Should I do this? Is this the right topic? That was me this week. But here's the thing. Here's what kept me from continuing with this topic. And that is what has helped me the most when it's come to mentors or scaling or insert the tasks that I want to do. It's really seeing behind the scenes how things have worked. And the second thing that's helped me the most is hiring people that have gone through what I am going through so that I can learn from them and what they learned along the way. And so honestly, it comes down to practicing what you preach, right? So before joining any program, and we're going to get to the takeaways that I have, but before joining any program or hiring any coach or investing in anything, I always recommend that you do 2 things. The first one is a little bit different, and that is, I say check the vibe, right? So how do you feel when you talk to the coach, the mentor, the strategist, the person that's helping you, right? Like, how do you feel when you talk to them? You should feel good. You should feel like you can be comfortable asking questions. You're not intimidated. You feel like it's an open environment. That's really important to me. But the second thing, and this is where it gets a little bit different, is what do they do in their free time? What do they prioritize? So let me give you a little bit of an example. I would probably not hire somebody that runs their business solely on TikTok. Now, the reason being is I don't want to be on TikTok. I'm sure it works. I have no doubt about it. There are some amazing, amazing women that have a thriving business because of TikTok. But that's not what I like to do. So I want to learn from somebody that's emulating what I want, if that makes sense. So what I would do is I would hire somebody who likes to travel, who most likely have kids. And if they don't have kids, they understand what it's like to have like a jam-packed schedule, right? And potentially even has a corporate background because they can relate to where I'm at and how I got here and like things that you go through. So think about when you're joining a program or purchasing or investing in someone to help you. What is the lifestyle that they're living? Because that's honestly what you want, right? Like I'm always saying, you want to build a life priorities-based business. Look at the lifestyle first. Then you learn the strategy or toolkit that they use to get there. So number 1, biggest takeaway before investing is check the vibe. Number 2, and you've heard this one before, is ask for results, case studies, testimonials. There should be something. If they recently pivoted their business and it's new, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest. It should mean, though, that they have some real life experience in what they're talking about. Who have they worked with in the past? And what have they invested in, right? So I would never ask you to join a mastermind if I had never been in one, right? Like if I'm not investing in myself, why would you invest in me? And so I tell my husband all the time, I need to join this because I like to practice what I preach, which means networking, community, coaching, all the things. Those are the things that have helped me scale. But I can't run a community unless I'm constantly learning and growing as well, because business practices change, right? They change at a drop of a hat. Sometimes things change in a day. So it's helpful for me as a business strategist to be in a community or in a mentorship where I can learn too. So when it came to investing in myself this year, this is where we're going to get really behind the scenes. First, I answered both those questions, the vibe and the case study. And then I joined a mastermind hosted by my friend, Linda Sidhu. Now, here's where the vibe part comes in. So I knew Linda through one of my corporate friends. She's actually going to be on the podcast here in a couple of months. They were actually sister-in-laws, which is like a whole nother story. But I had multiple friends reaching out to me saying, hey, you guys should really meet. And I always wrote it down and I never followed up, right? Like it was one of those things where you're like, oh, I know I should do it. And then life happens and you never do it. So sometime in December of last year, I had three people in a week reach out to me about how I should reach out to her and that our audiences would be so aligned, right? So it's like the networking, the antisocial strategy at play. And I was like, okay, this is a sign. So I finally did. Fun fact, we grew up 10 minutes apart, had the same high school friends, like the list could go on. We chatted for over an hour. And at the end, she was like, look, I'm not pitching you, but I really think you should do this program. And honestly, I was sold before she even invited me because of the vibe, right? I love the vibe. She didn't hard sell me and she had the case studies to prove it. So going back to biggest takeaways, you honestly know before you even say yes. And obviously the universe was on my side for this one because we met like 1 week before her program closed. And so I'm just a big believer that things happen for a reason. So if you're listening to this and there's something that you've been putting off, this is your sign that you should do it. But also I'm sharing this because I think sometimes we know what we need to do and we don't because we're like, oh, it's not that important, or fear holds us back. And so long story short, I finally introduced myself and the rest is history. So take the first step. There's no one way to run a business, but partner with somebody who matches the lifestyle goals that you have. So what have I learned inside this mastermind? Well, number one, partner with somebody that matches the lifestyle goals that you have. Number two is this mastermind that I'm in is for 12 months. And I would say most of the women in the mastermind make way more than I have and been in business way longer. So if I'm being honest, the first 2 months were overwhelming in the best way. I honestly don't love the word overwhelm, but that's how I felt, right? So you don't want it to feel comfortable. It should feel awkward. It should feel overwhelming. It should be like, oh, wow, how am I going to consume all this? That's what you're paying for. That's what you want. You want to be challenged. So takeaway number one is don't be the smartest in the room. And it's okay to feel awkwardly uncomfortable, right? Like we want to challenge ourselves to step into this like next level of growth. So we're about 5 months in now. And I would say like I'm used to being uncomfortable. And I'm like trying to just play this little game with myself of like, okay, I'm going to get on this call and it's going to be super awkward and I'm going to be challenged in a million ways, but that's okay because I'm going to learn. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two is the program doesn't do the work for you. So it's not like I like signed up for this program and then was like, oh my God, my business scaled $100 million. Like that's not how it works. So with any program, mastermind, group program, whatever, there are calendars, homework, engagement, ways to, ask questions. So the actual work is on you. And I feel like sometimes we forget this. Like we think that there's this magical secret sauce. And trust me, if there was, I would share it, but there isn't. And so what there is the ability for you to sit down and be like, how am I going to make this thing work for me? So what I did was I sat down and I mapped out my schedule, right? So we know we love a good schedule here and theme days. And so I said, hey, when am I going to engage with the group? Like, when am I going to sit down and actually get to know the members of this group? That was number one. Number two is when am I going to learn? Like, when am I actually going to set aside time to like watch the master classes, ask questions? Some of them are live. Some of them I can make. Some of them I can't, but I obviously want to watch the replays because I'm investing in this. So when are you going to learn? And then last but not least, when are you going to implement? So when am I going to have time to actually implement what I learned? Otherwise, you're just consuming and you're not actually doing the work. So for me personally, I had to update my schedule to make space for this, right? So you can't just like join a program and be like, oh, it's going to be magical. I mean, it feels magical when you do, and it should, but there's got to be space for you to implement and consume and implement some more. And so I had to update my schedule to make space to take advantage of all these amazing women I'm learning from. And joining the program was the first step. So now I have time set aside to engage, to learn, to implement. And no one else can do that for you, right? Like I could teach you a million things. And unless you had this time mapped out, it's not going to matter. So that's number 2. When are you actually taking time to do the thing, right? And then takeaway number 3 is ask the most questions. Like I want to give you an award for asking the most questions. And I remember one of my college professors saying, there can never be too many questions. So I ask questions all the time. I make it a challenge to ask at least one question a call, right? So if I'm stuck, I ask a question. If I don't know what they're talking about, I ask a question. If I want to collaborate, I ask a question. And then I follow up and I ask more questions. So I want you to challenge yourself on any call or networking or insert whatever thing there is, like speak up and ask questions, because you never know what's going to come out the other side of that. And what I have learned is that people love to help, right? Like how many times do you ask somebody like a question about your kids or like what their favorite show is? This is like a very basic example, and you get like a million answers, right? So people love to help. Ask the questions. That goes back to actually taking the time to use the program to help you. And if you are in the right community and you ask the right questions, the possibilities are endless. So if you're still with me and listening and this feels like ridiculously simple, it's because it is. Because sometimes we overcomplicate what a program or a coach or a mastermind should do. And it honestly comes down to a couple of things, right? Like, do they paint the picture of where you want to be? What results can they help you get? And what are you going to do? It's your responsibility to make the vision come to life. Do you have time to implement it? And if you're not sure, ask, how much time do you think this is going to take to implement? Because they should have an answer. So a couple of months into this mastermind, and I've made some amazing friends. We've had some epic collabs. A lot of them are coming this summer, so stay tuned. The podcast guests that we've been able to attract are like nothing that I have imagined. And I've learned so much. Like this podcast episode would not exist if I hadn't have introduced myself to Linda back in December. So my message is get in the room, but also, where do you want to go and what do you want to do? And let's make that come to life. So I hope this episode just inspires you that there are people out there who want to help. And it's much easier than you think to find a community that actually gets you to where you want to go. And of course, our room is open. So if you head on over to hollymariehaines.com/mastermind, you can apply to our next cohort. I always say it's so much more than a mastermind. We need a new name, but if you could spend, let me backtrack. You could spend over $25,000 a year hiring copywriters and coaches and strategists and web designers and all the things, or you could join our world and get it all in one place, plus an amazing network. So I hope you take this episode as a little bit of a mix behind the scenes and questions that I would ask myself and an invitation to take a peek at our community. Again, you can go to hollymariehaines.com/mastermind, or you can just DM me mastermind and we can chat to see if it's a good fit.